I could spend the next 90 minutes talking maybe just about John Morant, but we did do that a little bit last week. The block, by the way, if the backboard isn't there, I don't know if he's back down on the ground yet. That was in the Lakers game, and then they beat Golden State last night. Really tough team, man. Memphis is playing some great basketball, and they're super intense. There was playoff-level defense, I thought, from them last night. Yes, I know Draymond wasn't there, and Clay's just got back, but whatever. When John needed to take over, he took over that game. And they are now creeping into what maybe we should start looking at as a real contender coming out of the West, which still feels a little premature despite the 10 straight wins. All right, let's talk about another group that wins, and that's the SEC. National title game, we're on a Wednesday, not on Tuesday after the fact. I picked Georgia. I felt like an idiot for picking Georgia, so I'm not going to do any kind of victory lap because I just know how tenuous all this stuff can be. And honestly, if Jamison Williams doesn't get hurt, I think that game could have gone Bama's way on top of everything else, too. So I don't feel like, hey, I nailed it. I felt dumb when I took the pick. I just felt like picking against Bama in this one. I felt like doing something a little bit different, and I did it, and there you go. Whatever. Okay, so now let's go through some facts here. Is Russillo going to do an SEC segment? Yep. 3 different SEC schools have won titles in 3 straight years. LSU, Bama, and now Georgia. That's 12 titles in 16 years from 5 different teams. So you're saying, all right, here we go. You guys are going to do the timeline where you go back 16 years to make the argument. The argument that I'm trying to make is very simple, is that when somebody is telling you that this conference isn't the best, they're lying to you. All right. I did it before on the radio, and we're going to go over a bunch of different stuff. Let's start with draft picks. The SEC has had the most draft picks going into the NFL for 15 straight years. Over the last 10 years, the SEC has had 557 draft picks. The second place conference over those same 10 years has had 428. So on average, over the last 10 years, the SEC has put in 13 more draft picks per year than the second place conference. Shout out to the Big Ten and ACC who make up those conferences. Yes, I understand that the SEC has 14 teams. So does the Big Ten and so does the ACC. It's not a very good argument, even though the Big 12 in 2017, the Big 12 as a conference with 10 teams had 14 players going. 14 players. So now if you're saying, all right, well, you're going over 10 years there, you're doing 15 years with the draft, 16 years with the conference, it's actually getting worse. It's getting worse when you compare it. If you go the last 3 years, the SEC has 20 more picks per year than the number 2 conference. All right? Let's look at recruiting rankings. We know they have the talent coming out. We also know they have it coming in. I use 24/7. You use whatever you want to use. Last 5 years, number of SEC teams with a recruiting class that ranks in the top 10. This past year, 4, 6, 5. 2018, a little down, only 2 classes in the top 10. In 2017, back to 4 classes in the top 10. If you look at where their 10th team, I just landed on 10 and I compared it to the Big Ten because I think the Big Ten is the only conference that has a chance to end this supremacy and to be able to position themselves as the best conference. There have been a couple years we're going into it. I go, this might be the year. It might be the year. And I do believe that despite this dominance, that it is cyclical in sports. Think about the Eastern and Western Conference in the NBA and all the changes that we wanted to make. And yeah, it went on for a really long time where the West was far superior to the East. But now look at it. You ride it out for a bit. It feels like it's finally caught up, even though it feels like it took forever. And it may seem impossible to think that another conference is going to catch up to the SEC. But I think the Big Ten, it's a possibility. All right. So if you look at where the 10th placed class ranked in the SEC and where you compare that to where they rank nationally, let's go this way. The 10th place team in 2021 for the SEC recruiting-wise was 26th, then 28th, 23rd, 32nd, and 27th. If you go over the same period of time and look at the Big Ten's 10th ranked team, because we're also talking about depth and not just the top, the Big Ten is ranked 46th, 44th, 45th, 50th, and 46th. Shout out to Michigan State, Minnesota, and Illinois, and also as a little side shout out for Maryland. You won't believe this, but if you go back, unless you're a real locked-in Terp, Maryland has some pretty high recruiting rankings for football classes. I was kind of surprised when I look back at that. All right, but what about the bowls, Russillo? You're right. Sometimes the SEC doesn't do well in the bowls. What does that mean? Well, let's take a look. And this past season, the SEC went 6-8 in bowls. Granted, that last loss, kind of a big one, title game. Big 12 had a good bowl season, 5-2. We'll get to that in a second. Pac-12, 0-5. In 2020, the SEC went 7-2. The Big 12 went 5-0. So good Big 12 years back to back. The ACC actually went 0-5. It could be 0-6. I don't include Notre Dame. They don't include themselves in the ACC, so let's not do that. So I'm not going to add that to make it look even worse for the ACC. 2019, the SEC went 8-2. ACC went 4-7. Big Ten went 4-5. Big 12 went 1-5. The Pac-12 went 4-3. 2018, SEC down year for them, 506-6. The best winning percentage of any of the major 5 conferences. The Big 12 led the way going 4-3. So there's also another thing that seems to happen here is that when the SEC loses a bowl game, it's like, oh, I thought that conference was good. Yeah, Texas Tech put it on them, man. Beat the shit out of Mississippi State. I don't know what to tell you. But there are other conferences that in all of the recent years have had disastrous bowl seasons, and yet those parts of the country point to when Purdue beats Tennessee. In 2017, the SEC went 5-6. The Big Ten was awesome that year. They went 7-1. The Pac-12 went 1-8. Now, I could go even deeper if I wanted to on the bowl records. If I wanted to do that, I could, because we can find some nuance in there. The Big 12 went 5-2 this year. Well, they also had Baylor beat Ole Miss, where Matt Corral gets knocked out of the game, and Kansas State's pounding their fucking chest because they beat LSU, who had a wide receiver at quarterback. But I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that because we can find holes in all the bowl stuff. But if you look at the collective of the last 5 years for some down SEC bowl seasons, you've had every other conference with a disastrous bowl season. All right? Here's the other exercise. Do this and be honest with yourself. Run through the Power 5 standings. Look at the teams and say, how many teams can you get to before you start laughing about them winning a national championship? The ACC. Clemson, no doubt. Florida State, as bad as it's been, you're not going to sit here and say that's incapable of that to happen. And then what? Miami, don't you fucking dare. Then who? I'm waiting. Louisville, because they've had a taste. Pittsburgh and Wake, because they're ranked this year. NC State, I don't know. Big 12, I think we can get to 4. Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, Baylor. Yeah, I believe Baylor. I guess Iowa State, if you want to include Texas, you can maybe get to 5. Gary Patterson in his prime at TCU. Yeah, not impossible. Big Ten has real ones. Michigan, Ohio State, Michigan State. Michigan State was in a playoff. Penn State, I think, can be in this. And I really do think if things broke the right way for Wisconsin one year, that it's not impossible to think of them winning a national championship. And Iowa does recruit well. They've had good records. They've had good teams. But watching, if I were to do another exercise and say, did you watch Michigan and Iowa? Did you watch Georgia and Alabama? Did you think it looked like the same sport? Because I didn't. Pac-12, I'm not even going to bother with it. I'm not going to bother. Hell, the SEC with A&M, who was 5th just outside of the playoff 2 years ago, like A&M's going to end up in a playoff. They're going to end up in a playoff at some point. I feel very strong about that. That would be 6 teams for the SEC. So the exercise is what? The exercise is only to remind you that the next time when we're into next season, and again, the SEC is probably going to have some down year. Maybe no teams will be in the playoff, and then everyone will say, oh, it's over. I knew it. Well, they didn't know anything because it's not happening. The Bama meme is funny where it's carrying the rest of the franchises on his shoulders, but it's not accurate. It's not accurate when it's LSU, Bama, and then it's Georgia, and then it's still some other teams that are potentially in the mix. So what I'd ask you is this. When you hear somebody telling you, oh, Purdue went down there and beat Tennessee. Like, yeah, you're right. Like, they're going to lose some games. I don't think the argument was that they were supposed to go undefeated in every game ever. The reason I bring this up, though, is because I, like you, consume it all. I sit at home. And when I start hearing a guy veer into this territory where he's like, well, actually, like, no, there's no well, actually. This is a ridiculous run. It is historic. If any other conference did this, we would talk about that conference being the best, with the best recruits, the best draft picks, the best title resume. We would do it. And the depth. Sorry that Purdue beat Tennessee. But when I see somebody on television kind of going down that road, I think, hey, this guy's lying to all of us. And more importantly, he's probably lying to himself.